Well, 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 I see we have visitors.
Yarp.
Today I'm going to talk about a movie that I've been wanting to discuss for years on this channel. Since it's the 15th anniversary this month, what better time to talk about it than now? Hot Fuzz, directed by Edgar Wright, starring Simon Pegg, Nick Frost, Tim Dalton, Jim Broadbent, and quite a few other people show up in here. It's pretty amazing when you look at who's who in here. It's a story about a police officer from London named Nicholas Angel, who's basically the top cop of London. Really good at his job, excels in every area of his life, professionally, academically, except for the personal stuff, which we'll talk about in a little bit. As a cop, he basically is really good. In fact, he's too good at it. Everybody in the force is jealous of his theatrics and they feel like he's gonna put them all out of a job. So they reassign him to this small village called Sanford. And along the way, he discovers certain things that other people are completely oblivious to and starts to uncover a very sinister plot going on. There's probably better people to talk about Edgar Wright's movies, especially this one. Probably my personal favorite that I've seen from him that he's ever done. I've seen Baby Driver. Shaun of the Dead is hilarious. One of the few times that I can enjoy something from the zombie genre. World's End I didn't think was too bad, but I didn't entirely love the way it ended, but that's a whole nother story entirely. I have yet to see Last Night in Soho. I know some people were upset over him not being the director of Ant-Man, but I still appreciate that they used some of his ideas for the movie in the long run anyway. But this has always been my favorite Edgar Wright movie. Just the way it plays on the antics and tropes of cop films, but yet it's able to do those things anyway and still get away with doing them, because I think Edgar Wright, in so many ways, he's one of those filmmakers that is not afraid to talk about how stupid and cliched certain things are in movies, but yet he's able to do it anyway while acknowledging how ridiculous it all is. And similar to the movie Snatch by Guy Ritchie, Wright has a really interesting way of doing visual comedy with his movies, where you're able to have people communicate things without saying anything, which we've seen in plenty of other movies. The cinematography and the way he moves the camera in on certain people and the montages that he uses throughout certain sequences in the film, it never ceases to make me laugh. Particularly like in the lineup scenes where people are holding up the signs as they're getting pictured, and Angel's just writing down certain information on the paperwork. He's done that in his other movies, but I think that, as I said, this is my favorite use of it that he's done. And I personally have a little bit of a soft spot for cop films. I've talked about this before in other videos. I have a relative who is in law enforcement. He's a cop in New York City. Ever since he joined the police department in New York, I've always had a really big respect for law enforcement. Obviously, the good, honest, hardworking ones that are trying their best, not the ones who abuse their powers. I don't want to get too deep into that, but after seeing Shaun of the Dead at about 14, 15 years old, and I heard that the same director and the same actors were going to make a movie, like a British cop movie, I thought, ooh, that's an interesting idea. I'd like to see that. I was about 16 and a half years old when this came out. I was a sophomore in high school. This came out in the spring of 2007, 15 years ago. I saw it with a friend of mine at the time that I was going to school with, and he had seen Shaun of the Dead too. He had shown it to me, so we decided to go. Only then did we realize that we weren't exactly age appropriate, because my friend wanted to buy the ticket and the person behind the counter, who just happened to be in our class in high school, told us that we couldn't go in. But then I lied and I said, no, I'm 17. I can buy the tickets. He said, okay, just give me your money, your credit card or whatever he said, I forget. He didn't ask me for ID or anything. He just accepted that I was 17. I don't know how we got away with it, but we did. And it turned out to be a really great experience. There's so many memories from this movie, especially the ketchup pack gag. The whole theater, including me and my friend, laughed our butts off for a good minute and 30 seconds, and after a while, all of us in the theater couldn't hear what the characters were saying. The thing about Nicholas Angel is that he's a really straightforward, business and very little pleasure type of person, but he's an easily likable protagonist because you really appreciate just how exactly good he is at his job and how very knowledgeable he is and how he doesn't screw around when something really bad is happening, even though you could argue that sometimes he's taking it way too seriously. They do acknowledge it in the movie where he says he doesn't know how to switch off. Unfortunately, it led to him losing his girlfriend, Janine, who's played by Cate Blanchett. Even though we don't see her face, she's wearing some kind of a hazmat CSI suit and a mask over her face. And even though he does really love what he does, because he had an uncle who was in the Metropolitan Police Service in London, he's worried that he doesn't know how to switch off whenever he gets off the clock, because he doesn't really have much of a life. And being in law enforcement is all he really knows. And it's through his partnership with Danny, played by Nick Frost, where he's able to kind of let loose and be a little bit more uninhibited and free. Danny's the opposite. He doesn't really take his job that seriously at all, and he longs for some really exciting adventures as a police officer. Kind of bases what he knows about law enforcement from cop films like Die Hard, Point Break, or Bad Boys 2, which we see clips of in the movie, and a pretty big hilarious reference to Point Break. Just a little side note, I've actually never seen Point Break, but I want to though. But hopefully one day I'll be able to check it out. I will give you that it was a no-holds-barred, fuel adrenaline thrill ride, but there's no way you can incur that carnage and mayhem and not incur a considerable amount of paperwork. Simon Pegg and Nick Frost in this movie are just absolute perfection. And them being friends in real life obviously really helps. The way they play off each other, it's that opposite attract situation, a joy to see on screen. And they do a similar thing in all three of these movies, the Cornetto trilogy or the Blood and Ice Cream trilogy, whatever it's called. Shaun of the Dead, they're both basically losers, even though Shaun is the more well-adjusted loser, I suppose. Whereas in World's End, he's the complete loser, and Nick Frost is the straight man. We'll save those for another time, but it's in this movie where I think the way they bounce off each other is best utilized. And how Danny constantly asks him, like, have you ever fired your gun whilst jumping through the air? No. Have you been in a high-speed pursuit? Yes, I have, actually. Have you ever fired your gun while in high-speed pursuit? No.
Yes.
Is it true that there is a place in a man's head that if you shoot it, it will blow up?
And Simon Pegg's face when he asks that question. I don't know how many times I had to do these scenes without any of them laughing. I guarantee you that it took them so many freaking times to get it right. And that's the thing. I like comedies when they're good, but unfortunately, a lot of times, well, comedy is probably the hardest thing to do. Making people laugh is probably the hardest thing to do, and it's the most subjective thing in film. For me, I'm able to laugh at certain things for the most part, but it takes a really good joke or something really, really clever to get me howling with laughter or making my side split. This movie does exactly that, and being someone from the United States, British humor, I think, is the best humor on the planet. Yep, I said it.
When's your birthday?
22nd of February.
What year?
Every year. Get out.
8th of May, 1969? You're 37? Yeah? Get out. There's a lot of other things to it throughout the film that just adds to the level of humor that this movie has, such as the desk sergeant, who turns out to be a twin. When you see him with a really nice clean haircut, and then you see him the next morning supposedly with bed hair, and he have very kind of a disillusioned, very pessimistic attitude. Nobody tells me nothing. And all the other officers like Sergeant Tony Fisher, Doris Thatcher, Bob Walker, who's basically mumbling throughout the entire thing, and he has a guard dog named Saxon, and the two detectives, the Andys, and Jim Broadbent, who plays Frank Butterman, Danny's father, who turns out to be the main antagonist of the film later on. And the movie is pretty blunt in letting you know that something's not right with this village. Everything seems fine on the surface, but when certain characters pop up, like Simon Skinner, played by Tim Dalton, you know right away as a viewer that, despite his charming personality, something about him just is very sinister. Certain things he says to people, or certain ways that he acts. You can tell that he's flaunting around the fact that he's doing some really secretly evil things, as long as nobody can prove it. My discount's a criminal. Catch me later! And it turns out that Skinner is a member of the Neighborhood Watch Alliance, with certain people like Dr. Hatcher, Reverend Shooter, Leslie Tiller, who turns out to be killed by the NWA. A lot of them are basically elders in their 50s or 60s, and maybe even 70s. But I didn't notice this until watching it recently, that when certain things happen, like the one person, George Merchant, who dies in the house explosion, certain members of the NWA are at the crime scene watching the police officers doing their thing, trying to make sure that nobody's catching on to what they're doing. It's because Nicholas Angel's starting to read between the lines, noticing that there's something not right with these crime scenes. You don't have to be a detective to work that out. Just a little side note, when he pulls Martin Blower over for speeding, just the way Simon Pegg writes down in the notebook, repeating what he's saying.
This is preposterous.
Preposterous.
Look, stop writing!
Stop writing.
I love that part so much. And there's even a lot of memorable lines in this movie that to this day, I still quote them once in a while when I think about it, besides the preposterous lines.
How can this be for the greater good? The greater good. Shut it!
Even though Angel's very determined that there's something going on, due to all the other police officers that are completely oblivious to the obvious fact, it's leading him to question whether or not he's actually going crazy because of what he's experienced going on in London. All of his fears are finally confirmed when the cloaked figure that we see throughout the movie finally show up in his hotel room, and it's revealed to be the trolley boy, Michael.
Lives up Summer Street with his mum and his sister.
And are they as big as his?
Who?
The mum and the sister.
Same person.
Even now, 15 years later, I still don't know how to respond to that. But when he eventually tracks down the real culprits behind these accidents or these murders, he discovers that it's the whole NWA that's behind it, along with Frank Butterman. And this is all about winning the Best Village of the Year award, because a number of years ago, 20 years prior, Frank's wife, Irene, put so much effort into making this possible that a bunch of outsiders from out of town came in and basically ruined everything, causing her to lose her mind, and she killed herself by vehicular suicide. And from that moment on, Frank swore that he would make up for what happened. And just when you think that Danny is in on this whole thing, you turn out that he's actually not, but he was so trusting and loyal to, and loving to his dad that he never really questioned it, but eventually teams up with Nicholas to take down the NWA and take the town back. And the third act of the movie is Edgar Wright basically going full force with all the cop movie cliches, embracing them, yet satirizing them at the same time. Hopefully I said the word right. Satirizing? Satiring? I don't know. I'll just go with either one. Making it even better, they managed to win the remaining cops over and convince them of what's happening, containing one of the best comebacks towards that old lady who was working at the front desk at the hotel.
Fascist!
Hag.
And eventually he gets promoted to inspector, Danny gets promoted to sergeant, and everything just seems to be back to normal in Sanford as they continue on with their cop endeavors. I have to admit though, I think I heard at the time that they were going to make a sequel to this, and a part of me still kind of wishes that they did make a sequel, because there was so much potential and so many great things that you could do with these characters. But at the same time though, I'm glad that they didn't, because odds are it wouldn't have been as good, and we would have been comparing and contrasting to how good or bad it was in comparison. I do like that it's a one-off at the end of the day, or that we can just imagine what happened to them afterward. But Hot Fuzz, being my personal favorite Edgar Wright film, is a perfect cop movie that you could ask for in all the right ways. Finding the humor in all the cop movie tropes and still playing them out at the same time. Is it my favorite cop movie? Well, I wouldn't say necessarily, but it's definitely up there in the top tier for me. Those are my thoughts on Hot Fuzz. I had a really great time talking about this, and I hope you guys enjoyed hearing me talk about it too. What are your thoughts on the movie? And what's your favorite in this Blood and Ice Cream trilogy? Is it Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, or World's End? Or how would you rank them? Whatever the case is, comment below and tell me your thoughts, and I'll see you guys in the next one.